That morning, my son-in-law laid a hand on me and I stayed quiet. By dinner time, I had cooked a feast fit for a king. My daughter smiled and said, "You finally understand your place, Dad." She was right, I did understand. But she stopped smiling the moment she saw who was sitting at the head of the table. If you have ever felt the stinging pain of betrayal from the people you sacrificed everything for, please hit that like button. It helps this old man know he is not alone. And subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the rest of this story, because trust me, you are going to want to see how this dinner ends. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from. The heavy folder of loan documents hit my chest before I could even pour my morning coffee. It slid down my flannel shirt and landed with a thud on the cold marble floor. I did not need to pick it up to know what it was. It was the third time this month Gavin had tried to force this on me. "Sign the papers!" Harry Gavin screamed, his voice cracking with a desperation that only a gambler knows. "We need the equity from the Lake Geneva house by noon or the deal falls through. Do not be a stubborn old fossil, just sign the damn line." I bent down slowly. My knees popped a sound that seemed to echo in the cavernous kitchen of the suburban Chicago mansion I had paid for. I picked up the documents. My hands were rough calloused from 40 years of handling reinforced steel and concrete, but they did not shake. Gavin's hands, however, were trembling. He was 35 years old, a so-called venture capitalist who wore three-piece suits to sit in front of a computer screen and lose money. I looked at the papers. It was a second mortgage application for the vacation home in Wisconsin. The interest rate was predatory, 7.5%. It was financial suicide. I looked up at him. He was sweating even though the central air conditioning was set to a brisk 68 degrees. "No, Gavin," I said, my voice low and steady. "I told you last week and I am telling you now. The answer is no. This structure cannot support any more weight. You are already over-leveraged." I spoke like the structural engineer I used to be. I spent my life calculating loads and stresses, ensuring that skyscrapers in downtown Chicago did not collapse under their own weight. I knew a failing structure when I saw one, and Gavin Cross was a building on the verge of implosion. "You do not get to tell me about leverage, you old parasite," Gavin spat back, stepping into my personal space. "You live under my roof. You eat my food. You exist because I allow it." I almost laughed. His roof. I bought this house 5 years ago when Emily said they needed more space for a family they never started. I paid cash, but I let them put their names on the mailbox because I wanted my daughter to feel proud. I wanted her to feel secure. Now that security was being used as a weapon against me. "I am not signing, Gavin," I said, placing the folder on the granite island. "And I am not a parasite. I pay for the groceries, I pay the utilities, and I mow the lawn that you are too important to touch." That was the moment the dam broke. I saw it in his eyes first. A flash of pure, unadulterated rage. He was not used to being told no. He was a man who lived on credit and false promises, and I was the only reality check he had left. His hand moved faster than I expected for a man who had never done a day of physical labor in his life. The back of his hand connected hard with my right cheek. The sound was sickeningly loud in the quiet kitchen. It sounded like a dry branch snapping in winter. The force of it knocked my head to the side. My glasses, the wire-rimmed aviators I had worn since I was supervising the concrete pours at the Willis Tower, flew off my face. They skittered across the marble floor and hit the base of the refrigerator with a crunch. I stood there frozen. My cheek burned like I had been touched by a welding torch. But I did not fall. I did not cry out. I just stood there tasting the copper tang of blood from where my tooth had cut the inside of my lip. I slowly turned my head back to look at him. Gavin was breathing heavily, his hand still raised slightly, as if he was surprised by his own violence. But there was no regret in his eyes, only a dare. He was waiting for me to crumble. He was waiting for the old man to cry and beg for forgiveness, but I was not looking at Gavin. I was looking at him. Emily, my daughter, my only child, was standing in the doorway leading to the dining room. She was dressed in her power suit, ready for her job as a human resources director. She had seen everything. She had seen her husband strike her 72-year-old father. I waited. I waited for her to scream. I waited for her to run to me. I waited for her to kick him out. I waited for the little girl I had carried on my shoulders to defend the man who had worked double shifts to pay for her college tuition. Emily took a sip from her travel mug. She did not look at me. She looked at her watch. "Dad," she sighed, and the sound of her exasperation hurt more than the slap ever could. "You really provoked him this time. You know how much stress Gavin is under with the market shifting. Why do you have to be so difficult? Just sign the papers so we can have some peace." My heart, which had been hammering against my ribs, suddenly went still. It was a cold stillness, like the silence after a building demolition is complete and the dust begins to settle. I looked at my daughter. Really looked at her. I realized then that I did not know this woman. This was not the girl who used to cry when she found a wounded bird in the yard. This was a stranger who had chosen her side. She valued the lifestyle Gavin promised her more than the dignity of her own father. She was not a victim. She was an accomplice. I walked slowly over to where my glasses lay. I picked them up. One of the lenses was cracked right down the middle. The frame was bent. These glasses had survived Chicago winter's construction site accidents and 40 years of wear. They were tough, but they had finally broken under the weight of my family's greed. I put them in my shirt pocket. I wiped the trickle of blood from the corner of my mouth with the back of my hand. I looked at Gavin. He was puffing his chest out, empowered by his wife's support. Well, he barked. "Are you going to sign, or do I have to teach you another lesson?" I looked him dead in the eye. I summoned the same authority I used to use when I had to fire a negligent contractor on a job site. But I kept my voice low. Calm. Terrifyingly calm. "You made your point, Gavin," I said. Gavin sneered. "Good. So sign it." "I cannot sign it now," I said, gesturing to my shaking hands. "You rattled me. I need to calm down. I need to think." "You do not have time to think," Gavin shouted. "Tonight," I interrupted him. "Tonight. We will settle this at dinner." Gavin narrowed his eyes, suspicious of my sudden capitulation. "Dinner, yes," I said. "I will cook. I will make a special meal, a celebration. If I'm going to sign away the lake house, I want to do it properly. You bring the papers. Bring your lawyer too, that man Fletcher. I want everything to be legal." Gavin laughed. It was a cruel barking sound. "Look at that, Emily." The old dog finally learned a new trick. Obedience. Emily walked over and kissed Gavin on the cheek, ignoring me completely. "See, babe, I told you he would come around. He just needs a firm hand." A firm hand. That is what she called assault. "Fine," Gavin said, checking his reflection in the microwave door. "Have dinner ready by 7. And try not to burn it this time. Make something expensive. I feel like celebrating." They grabbed their briefcases and walked out the door without looking back. I heard the garage door open and the roar of Gavin's leased Porsche as they sped away to their important lives, leaving the old man behind to lick his wounds. I stood in the silence of the kitchen for a long time. I touched my cheek. It was throbbing. It would bruise by evening. Good. I wanted the bruise. I wanted them to see it. They thought I was defeated. They thought I was a senile old man who had finally been broken by fear. They saw a cracked lens and a bleeding lip. They did not know that they had just cracked the foundation of their entire world. I am a structural engineer. I know that when a load-bearing wall is compromised, you do not patch it with tape. You condemn the building, and you bring it down. I walked to the basement door. My legs felt stronger with every step. I was not going to the basement to hide. I was going to my old office. The one place in the house they never entered because it smelled of old paper and blueprints. Inside that office was a floor safe hidden under a rug. Emily thought it only contained my life insurance policy and her mother's old jewelry. She was wrong. I knelt down and spun the dial. Left, right, left. The heavy steel door clicked open. Inside was a stack of files I had been compiling for 6 months. Bank statements, emails I had recovered from the trash, and a burner phone I had bought with cash at a convenience store 3 towns over. I picked up the phone. I dialed a number I had memorized a lifetime ago. It rang twice. "Preston," I said when the deep voice answered. "It is Harry. It is time." There was a pause on the other end. "Are you sure, Harry? Once we start this, there is no going back." I touched my bruised cheek again. "I am sure," I said. "Bring Sterling. Bring the whole team. Come at 7 o'clock. The table is set." I hung up the phone and sat back in my old leather chair. I looked at the cracked lens of my glasses in my hand. Gavin wanted a celebration. He wanted something expensive. I would give him exactly what he asked for. I was going to serve him the most expensive meal of his life. I stood up and grabbed my car keys. I had to go to the market. I needed Wagyu beef. I needed vintage wine. And I needed to make sure my knife was sharp. Very sharp. Because tonight I was not just cooking dinner. I was carving out justice. The heavy oak door slammed shut, and the reverberation shook the picture frames in the hallway. I stood there alone in the foyer, listening to the silence that rushed in to fill the space they had left. The engine of Gavin's Porsche roared to life outside, aggressive and loud, before fading down the street. They were gone. They had left me bleeding in the kitchen of the house I bought, driving to jobs I had helped them secure, living a life built entirely on my shoulders. I walked over to the window and watched the car disappear around the bend. My hand went up to my cheek again. The skin was hot to the touch, and I could feel the swelling beginning to rise. A normal man would have gone to the freezer. A normal man would have grabbed a bag of frozen peas or a towel with ice to soothe the inflammation. But I was not feeling like a normal man today. I did not go to the freezer. I wanted the pain. I wanted the throbbing heat in my face to remind me exactly what had happened. I wanted the bruise to turn purple and ugly by this evening. I wanted it to be the first thing Gavin saw when he walked back through that door. It was not just an injury. It was evidence. It was the final crack in the structural integrity of this family. Emily, my little girl. The image of her standing there checking her watch while her husband assaulted me burned in my mind, hotter than the slap. That was the true betrayal. A slap is physical. It heals. But seeing your own flesh and blood choose convenience over morality, seeing her step over her father to get to her luxury car, that is a fracture that cannot be repaired. She thought she was keeping the peace. She thought she was being a good wife, but she had just become an accessory to a crime. Gavin's parting words echoed in the empty kitchen. "Do not play games, Harry. Fletcher is coming tonight. He will have the notary seal. You just sign and shut up." Fletcher. That crooked lawyer who smelled like stale cigars and cheap cologne. He was the one who helped Gavin set up the shell companies. He was the one who drafted the papers to drain my retirement fund. Gavin thought bringing Fletcher was a power move. He thought he was bringing a shark to eat a minnow. He did not know he was bringing the bait. I turned away from the window and headed towards the basement stairs. The upper floors of this house belonged to them. The marble, the skylights, the modern art that cost more than a year of college tuition, that was their world. A world of surfaces and appearances. My world was downstairs. I descended the wooden steps. The air down here was cooler, smelling of dry concrete and old paper. This was where I kept my life. Not the life they saw the old man watching TV in the corner, but my real life, my history. I walked into my office. It was a small room unfinished with exposed beams and a concrete floor. They hated this room. They called it the dungeon. They never came down here. That was their mistake. Arrogance always creates blind spots. I sat down at my heavy steel desk. It was an old drafting table I had saved from a demolition site in the 90s. I ran my hand over the smooth metal surface. Underneath the desk, beneath a worn-out Persian rug that Patrice had bought 40 years ago, was a floor safe. I pulled back the rug. The safe was old solid steel encased directly into the foundation. I had poured the concrete around it myself. When I told Gavin about it years ago, I said it just held some old insurance policies and sentimental junk. He had laughed and never asked about it again. He was too busy looking for quick digital transfers to care about a mechanical lock. I spun the dial. The tumblers clicked into place with a satisfying mechanical precision. The heavy door swung open. I reached inside. There were no insurance policies. Instead, I pulled out a thick stack of documents. These were the blueprints of Gavin's destruction. I laid them out on the desk. There was the forensic accounting report I had commissioned 3 months ago. It traced every single dollar Gavin had siphoned from the family accounts. There was the copy of the forged withdrawal slip from my 401k. He had practiced my signature. It was a good forgery, but not perfect. He missed the loop on the letter B in Blackwood. I always looped it twice. He only did it once. And there was the most damning piece of all. A printed email thread between Gavin and a group of short sellers. He was leaking false information about structural defects in the Sterling Tower, a building I had consulted on 20 years ago. He was trying to drive the stock price of the Sterling Corporation down so he could bet against it and make a fortune. He was willing to destroy my professional reputation, my legacy as an engineer, just to cover his gambling debts. I looked at the papers. This was not just a family dispute anymore. This was federal fraud. This was market manipulation. This was a felony. I reached back into the safe and pulled out a rolled-up tube of paper. I unrolled it on the desk, weighing down the corners with a stapler and a hole punch. It was the original structural schematic of the house we were standing in. I looked at the load-bearing walls. I looked at the foundation points. Gavin thought he was the master of this house. But I knew exactly where the weak points were. I knew exactly where to place the charges to bring the whole thing down in a controlled demolition. Finally, I reached into the back of the safe and pulled out a small, cheap flip phone. A burner. I had bought it with cash at a gas station 2 towns over. Gavin monitored the landline. He monitored the family cell plan. He thought he was smart. He thought he had cut off my lines of communication. I powered on the phone. The battery was full. I dialed a number I had not called in 6 months. It rang once, twice. A deep, gravelly voice answered on the 3rd ring. "This line is for emergencies only." "Hello, Preston," I said. My voice was calm, almost conversational. There was a pause on the other end. Then the tone of the voice changed. It softened, but retained its steel edge. "Harry, I have been waiting for this call. Is it done?" "It is done," I said. I looked at the bruise forming in the reflection of the dark basement window. "He crossed the line today, Preston. He got physical. And Emily," she stood by and watched. I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Preston was the United States Attorney for the Northern District of Illinois. But before that, he was just a kid from the neighborhood who I had kept out of trouble. I had paid for his first suit when he passed the bar exam. He called me Uncle Harry when we were alone. "Are you safe, Harry?" Preston asked. "Do I need to send a squad car now?" "No," I said. "Not now. If you arrest him now, he will claim it is a misunderstanding. He will claim I am a senile old man who got confused. We need him to commit to the lie. We need him to feel safe. What is the plan? Preston asked. He is coming back tonight at 7, I said. He is bringing Fletcher. They are going to try to force me to sign a second mortgage on the Lake Geneva property. They think I am broken. They think I'm going to sign everything over. Fletcher is coming. Preston asked, his interest peaking. That slippery eel. We have been trying to pin something on Fletcher for years. If he is there facilitating a fraudulent loan, Harry, that is conspiracy. Exactly, I said. That is why we wait. I am cooking dinner. I am making it a celebration. I want them relaxed. I want them arrogant. Okay, Preston said. I will have a team in place. No team yet, I corrected him. Just you. I want you to come to dinner. To dinner, Preston sounded confused. Yes. I told him I was inviting a friend, an old chess partner. He thinks you are just some retiree. Wear a dark suit. Look intimidating, but say nothing. I want him to wonder who you are until it is too late. And Harry, I added. Call Sterling. Margaret Sterling, Preston asked. The CEO. Yes. Tell her to come too. Tell her the man who is trying to tank her stock is going to be serving roast beef at 7 o'clock. Tell her I have the proof she needs to save her company and bury Gavin Cross. There was a long silence on the line. Then I heard a low chuckle, a dark, satisfied sound. You are going to put Gavin Fletcher, the federal prosecutor, and the CEO of the company he is sabotaging all at the same dinner table, Preston asked. That is the plan, I said. Harry, that is not a dinner party. That is an execution. It is a controlled demolition, Preston. I corrected him. And the fuse is lit. I will be there, Preston said. 7 o'clock sharp. I hung up the phone and powered it down. I put it back in the safe but left the door unlocked. I would need those documents soon. I sat there for a moment in the quiet of the basement. My cheek throbbed, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. I touched the rough concrete wall of the foundation. Gavin thought I was weak because I was old. He thought I was stupid because I worked with my hands. He forgot that before you can build a skyscraper, you have to dig a hole. You have to get down in the dirt and understand the pressure. I stood up. I had work to do. I had to go to the market. I had to buy the wine. I had to select the meat. I walked up the stairs, leaving the darkness behind. The game had changed. They were playing checkers, moving pieces around, trying to steal a little money here and there. I was playing structural engineering, and I was about to pull the pin on the whole foundation. I climbed the carpeted stairs to the second floor, leaving the safety of my concrete basement behind. The air up here felt thinner, artificially chilled by the central air conditioning that ran 24 hours a day. This was Gavin's territory. The hallway was lined with black and white artistic photos of cityscapes that Gavin had bought at a gallery for thousands of dollars. He liked the aesthetic of the city, but he knew nothing about the steel bones that held it up. I walked down the hall to the double doors of his home office. He called it his command center. It was the largest room in the house with bay windows overlooking the manicured lawn. I mowed every Thursday. I pushed the door open. The room smelled of cedar and the expensive leather polish the cleaning lady used on his chair. It was messy. Not the organized chaos of a working engineer, but the careless clutter of a man who expects others to pick up after him. I walked over to his desk. It was a massive slab of imported glass resting on chrome legs. In the center sat his computer, a high-performance machine with 3 monitors curved around the seat like a cockpit. Gavin had always been arrogant about his technology. He mocked my flip phone. He made fun of my old desktop in the basement. He told Emily that I was a digital dinosaur, that I probably did not know how to turn on a monitor. That arrogance was his vulnerability. I tapped the spacebar on his keyboard. The 3 screens flared to life instantly. He had not shut it down. He had not even locked it. He assumed that even if I wandered in here, I would just see lines and numbers and walk away confused. He put the computer to sleep just like he thought he had put me to sleep. I sat in his leather chair. It was too soft. It swallowed you up. I preferred a hard stool that kept your spine straight. I looked at the screens. They were filled with stock tickers changing colors from red to green, rapid-fire chat windows, and open spreadsheets. To the untrained eye, it looked like complex financial wizardry. To me, it looked like a structure with too much load on the top floor. My eyes scanned the desk. A yellow sticky note was plastered to the bottom of the center monitor. It had a string of characters written in Gavin's jagged handwriting. Geneva House 75. It was the password for his banking portal. He was lazy. A good engineer memorizes his safety protocols. A lazy man writes them on a post-it note. I did not need to log in yet. I needed to see what he had been doing before he left to assault me in the kitchen. I looked to the left of the desk. A wire mesh trash can sat there, overflowing with crumpled paper. Gavin liked to print things out to read them. He said he liked the feel of paper when he was making big moves. I reached into the bin and pulled out a ball of paper from the top. I smoothed it out on the glass desk, pressing the wrinkles flat with my palm. It was a transaction confirmation from Fidelity Investments. I felt a cold drop in my stomach. That was where my 401k was held. The money I had saved over 45 years of freezing winters and scorching summers on construction sites. The money meant for my final years, so I would never be a burden to anyone. I read the document. Withdrawal amount $200,000. Distribution method, wire transfer. Destination account, Cross Ventures, LLC. My eyes moved to the bottom of the page. There was a signature. Harrison Blackwood. It was my name. It looked like my handwriting, but the loop on the H was too wide, and the pressure was too light. I signed my name like I etched it in stone. This signature floated on the paper. He had practiced. He had forged my signature to drain the bulk of my retirement fund just last month. That was why he needed the loan on the lake house today. He had already spent my retirement, and he was still in the hole. I felt a wave of nausea. He had stolen my safety net. He had reached into my pocket and taken the years of labor I had stored there. But I forced the emotion down. I needed to be cold. I needed to be precise. I turned my attention back to the screens. One of the windows was an email draft. It was addressed to a journalist at the Financial Times. The subject line read, "Sterling Corporation Structural Defect Whistleblower." I leaned closer, adjusting my position in the chair. The email was drafted, but not sent. It read, "I have obtained internal memos from the original construction phase of the Sterling Plaza Tower. These documents confirm that the lead structural engineer, Harrison Blackwood, knowingly approved substandard concrete density for the main load-bearing pylons in the underground garage. He was paid off by suppliers to look the other way. The building is structurally unsound, and a collapse event is statistically probable within the next 5 years." I stopped breathing. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. Sterling Plaza. That was my masterpiece. I spent 4 years of my life on that site. I checked every truck of concrete. I tested every rebar weld personally. That building was safer than the ground it stood on. It was my legacy. It was the proof that I had existed and that I was good at what I did. Gavin was not just stealing my money. He was selling my name. He was murdering my reputation. I looked at the other screen. It showed a trading platform. He had a massive short position open on Sterling Corporation stock. It all clicked into place like a steel beam sliding into a rivet. He was going to send that email. He was going to leak a lie that I was corrupt and incompetent. The news would cause a panic. Sterling stock would crash. And Gavin would make millions betting against the company I helped build. He was going to use my destruction to fund his lifestyle. He was going to burn down my history to warm his hands. I stared at the glowing pixels. A cold fury settled over me. It was not the hot anger of the slap in the kitchen. This was different. This was the cold calculation of an engineer looking at a building that needed to be condemned. He thought I was a clueless old man. He thought I was just a source of funds. He did not realize that by attacking my professional integrity, he had declared a war he was not equipped to fight. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the burner phone. I opened the camera. I took a picture of the forged withdrawal slip. I made sure the lighting was clear so the fake signature was visible. I took a picture of the email draft on the screen. I took a picture of his short position on the trading platform, showing the millions of dollars he stood to gain from my ruin. I took a picture of the sticky note with his password. I recorded everything, every pixel of his betrayal. Then I carefully crumpled the paper back into a ball. I placed it back in the trash can exactly where I found it. I wiped the glass desk where my hand had rested, removing the heat print of my palm. I stood up. My knees did not pop this time. I felt light. I felt dangerous. I looked around the room one last time. This office with its view and its leather and its high-speed connection to the world was a lie. It was built on a foundation of theft and deceit. Gavin wanted to talk about structural failure. He wanted to talk about collapse. I walked to the door. He wants to bring down the foundation of my house, I whispered to the empty room. I am going to show him what a real collapse looks like. And I am going to make sure he is standing in the lobby when the roof comes down. I closed the door softly. I had a dinner to prepare, and now I knew exactly what the main course would be. It would be the truth served cold. The engine of my '98 Ford F-150 rumbled to life with a cough and a shake that rattled my teeth. It was a sound I loved. It was the sound of honest machinery. There were no computers in this engine block to hide flaws or cheat emissions tests. It was just iron, oil, and combustion. It was real. Unlike the plastic and fiberglass world Gavin lived in. I backed out of the garage, the tires crunching over the gravel that spilled onto the pristine driveway. I caught a glimpse of the house in the rearview mirror. It looked like a fortress, a monument to new money and bad taste. I had poured the foundation for it myself, ensuring it would stand for 100 years, never knowing I was building the prison where my wife would die and my dignity would be stripped away piece by piece. I drove toward the city, bypassing the discount grocery store where I usually shopped with my coupons and calculator. Today, I was not hunting for bargains. I was hunting for weapons. I pulled into the parking lot of Whole Foods. My rusted bumper looked out of place next to the Teslas and Range Rovers. I parked crookedly, taking up 2 spaces just because I felt like being a nuisance. I stepped out, smoothing down my flannel shirt. I still wore my work boots. Let them stare. The automatic doors slid open, releasing a blast of refrigerated air that smelled of organic produce and overpriced flowers. I grabbed a cart. One of the ones without a wobbling wheel. I needed precision today. I went straight to the butcher counter. The glass case was illuminated like a jewelry store display. Inside, resting on beds of crushed ice, were cuts of meat that cost more than my first car. I pointed a calloused finger at the center display. That one, I told the butcher, a young man with a waxed mustache, who looked like he had never held a hammer in his life. The Wagyu A5. He looked at me, scanning my worn clothes and the bruise blooming on my cheek. "Sir," he said, his voice dripping with polite condescension. "That is $150 a pound. We have some very nice chuck roast on sale if you are looking for a stew." I looked at him. I did not blink. I did not ask for chuck roast, son. I asked for the Wagyu. I want 4 pounds, thick cut, and trim the fat but leave enough for the sear. He swallowed hard, nodded, and reached into the case. As he weighed the meat, my mind drifted back 6 months. To a Tuesday. the day I asked Gavin for money to buy Martha her pain medication. The insurance had capped out, and she was hurting. She was hurting so bad she could not sleep. The good medicine, the brand name that actually worked without making her nauseous, cost $400. Gavin had stood in the kitchen checking his reflection in his $20,000 Rolex. $400, Harry, he had scoffed. That is ridiculous. Just get the generic stuff. It is the same chemical compound. She won't know the difference. We are tight this month. I have to pay the membership fees at the country club. He bought a watch that cost as much as a car, but he would not pay for my wife to have a painless night. I bought the generic, and I held her hand while she vomited from the side effects until dawn. I watched the butcher wrap the Wagyu. 4 pounds. $600. I will take it, I said. I threw the package into the cart. It landed with a heavy thud. Next was the produce section. I needed mushrooms, but not just any mushrooms. I walked to the specialty case where they kept the truffles. Black winter truffles imported from France. They looked like lumps of coal, but they smelled like earth and musk. I picked up a jar, $80 an ounce. Gavin loved to talk about refinement. He loved to talk about the finer things. He had once thrown a fit because the cleaning lady used the wrong polish on his Italian leather shoes. If you want to be treated like a king, Gavin, I whispered to the jar in my hand, I am going to feed you like one, right before the guillotine drops. I put 3 jars in the cart. Finally, I headed to the wine cellar at the back of the store. It was temperature-controlled, quiet, and smelled of cork and oak. I walked past the shelves of $20 bottles that Gavin usually drank on weeknights. I went to the locked cabinet. I scanned the labels until I found it. Chateau Margaux, 1995. The year Emily was born. I stared at the bottle through the glass. I remembered that year. I remembered holding her in the delivery room, her tiny hand gripping my finger. I remembered promising her that I would build her a world where she would never be unsafe. I worked double shifts for 20 years to keep that promise. I built the foundation of her life with my own sweat. And this morning, she watched her husband strike me and told me I was annoying him. I waved down the sommelier. He came over with a key ring. "Open it," I said. He unlocked the cabinet and carefully pulled the bottle out. It was covered in a fine layer of dust. "An excellent choice, sir," he said. "A very complex vintage. Are you celebrating a special occasion?" You could say that, I replied, taking the bottle. "I am celebrating the end of an era." I placed the wine in the child seat of the cart, careful not to clatter it against the metal. As I turned to head toward the checkout, a voice called out from the cheese counter. "Harry Blackwood, is that you?" I stopped. I knew that voice. It was deep, raspy, the voice of a man who had smoked too many cigarettes on high-rise scaffolding. I turned around. Standing there holding a wedge of aged cheddar was Tom Miller. We had worked together on the Millennium Park project back in the early 2000s. He was a site foreman, a good man who knew how to read a blueprint better than most architects. "Tom," I said, forcing a smile, "it has been a long time." He walked over, his eyes widening as he saw the bruise on my face. "Jesus, Harry, what happened? You run into a steel beam." "Something like that," I said, touching my cheek. "Just a little household accident." Tom looked skeptical, but he knew the code. You do not push a man about his scars unless he offers the story. He looked into my cart instead. Wagyu beef, Chateau Margaux, truffles. "Hell, Harry, did you hit the lottery, or did you finally decide to sell that patent?" I stiffened. The patent. Years ago, I had developed a specific type of joint coupling for high-stress seismic zones. It was a niche invention, something only a structural engineer would understand, but it was revolutionary. It allowed skyscrapers to sway 3% more without compromising the core integrity. I had patented it, then sat on it. I never sold it because I wanted to refine it. I wanted it to be perfect. Gavin knew I had some old drawings, but he had no idea what they were worth. He thought intellectual property was something you bought, not something you built in a garage. Word on the street is that Sterling Construction is looking for a new seismic solution for their West Coast expansion, Tom said, leaning in. They are saying your coupling is the only thing that passes the new codes. That patent must be worth a fortune now, Harry. Millions. I looked at the wine bottle. 1995. The year I became a father. The year I started building a legacy I thought I would leave to my family. I am not selling it, Tom, I said quietly. Tom looked confused. You are holding on to it. Why? You are retired. Cash out. Go to Hawaii. I am not holding on to it either, I said. A strange calm washed over me. Then what are you doing with it? I am giving it away, I said. Tom's jaw dropped. Giving it away. To who? I looked him in the eye. To the only people who still understand the value of a solid foundation, I said. You will hear about it on the news tomorrow, Tom. Tonight, I am having a dinner party, and I am serving justice. I patted him on the shoulder and pushed my cart toward the registers. I unloaded the groceries onto the belt. The total came to $1,432. I pulled out my old leather wallet. Inside was a credit card I had not used in 5 years. It was not linked to the joint account Gavin monitored. It was linked to a separate account, one funded by consulting fees I had done quietly over the years, fees I had hidden in the safe. The cashier ran the card. It was approved. I walked out into the parking lot, the plastic bags cutting into my fingers. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the asphalt. I loaded the precious cargo into the passenger seat of the truck, strapping the wine in with the seatbelt as if it were a passenger. I climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. The truck vibrated alive and ready. I had the meat. I had the wine. I had the evidence in the safe. And I had the guest list. Gavin wanted a feast. He wanted a show. I put the truck in gear and pulled out of the lot. I was going home to cook, and when I was done there would not be any leftovers. The kitchen island was no longer a place for family breakfasts. It was a workbench. I laid out the ingredients with the same precision I used to lay out blueprints for a suspension bridge. The Wagyu beef sat on a wooden board marbling white against the deep red room temperature, ready for the heat. The truffles were in a small glass bowl, dark and earthy. The bottle of Chateau Margaux stood open, breathing the air around it, smelling of oak and history. I sharpened my chef's knife. The sound of steel against the whetstone was rhythmic. Shk, shk, shk. It was the same sound as a shovel hitting gravel. It was the sound of work. I tested the edge against a piece of paper. It sliced through without a sound. Perfect. I started chopping the shallots for the reduction. My hands moved automatically. I did not look at the blade. I looked at the clock on the microwave. 6:15. They would be here soon. I placed a cast iron skillet on the burner and cranked the flame to high. You do not cook Wagyu on low heat. You need violence. You need a thermal shock to sear the outside while keeping the inside meltingly tender. It is like tempering steel. If you are too gentle, it fails. I dropped a knob of butter into the pan. It hissed and foamed, turning nut brown in seconds. I laid the steaks down. The sound was aggressive, a loud sear that filled the kitchen with white smoke and the smell of expensive fat rendering. I was flipping the meat when I heard the front door open. It was too early. Gavin said 7. The footsteps were light, clicking on the marble. High heels. Emily. She walked into the kitchen, stopping dead in her tracks when the wall of aroma hit her. She waved her hand in front of her face, coughing theatrically. Dad, what on earth are you doing? She asked, her voice shrill. I did not turn around. I basted the steaks with the brown butter and thyme. I am cooking dinner, Emily, I said calmly, like Gavin asked. She walked closer, her heels clicking a staccato rhythm. She peered over my shoulder at the pan. Her eyes widened when she saw the meat. She looked at the bottle of wine on the counter. She looked at the jar of truffles. This is Wagyu beef, she stammered. And that wine. Dad. That is $1,000 bottle. I plated the steaks to rest. I know what it is, Emily, I said, wiping my hands on a towel. She stepped back, her face twisting into a mask of suspicion. Where did you get the money for this? She demanded. You are on a fixed income. You complain about the price of gas. How did you afford this? She paused, a dark thought crossing her mind. Did you take Gavin's wallet? She accused. Did you go into his office and take his credit card? Dad, if you stole from him after what happened this morning, he is going to call the police. You know he will. I looked at my daughter. She was wearing a designer suit I knew cost more than my first truck. She was holding a bag that cost more than the roof repairs I did last year, and she was accusing me of theft. I did not steal anything, Emily, I said quietly. This is my money, my savings. Savings. She laughed a harsh disbelief sound. What savings? You spent everything on this house. I had a little put away, I lied, smooth as concrete, for a rainy day or a special occasion. She looked at the feast spread out on the counter. The suspicion in her eyes slowly morphed into something else, something pitying, something triumphant. Why, she asked. Why spend it all now? I poured a small amount of the wine into a glass to taste it. It was perfect. Because this is it, Emily, I said, looking her in the eye. This is the last of it. It is a farewell dinner. Her face softened. The tension left her shoulders. She interpreted my words exactly as I intended. She thought I was giving up. She thought I was spending my last few dollars before checking into a state-run nursing home or moving into a studio apartment in a bad neighborhood. She thought I was bowing out. Oh, Dad, she said, and her voice took on that sickly, sweet tone she used when she wanted something. You finally get it. You finally understand that this arrangement, it just was not working. It is better this way. For everyone. For everyone, I repeated. Yes, she said, reaching out to touch my arm, but pulling back when she saw the grease on my sleeve. Gavin needs his space. We need our privacy. And you need somewhere quieter. Somewhere you do not have to worry about maintenance or bills. It is the right decision, Dad. I am proud of you for being sensible. Proud of me. She was proud that I was making myself homeless to accommodate her husband's ego. She looked at the steaks again, licking her lips. Well, she said, brightening up, since it is a celebration, maybe I will go change into something nicer. It smells amazing, Dad. Really? You outdid yourself. She turned and trotted out of the kitchen, practically skipping. She was happy. She was relieved. Her problem was solving itself. The old man was leaving, and he was making dinner on his way out. I watched her go. I felt a coldness in my chest that had nothing to do with the temperature. It was the feeling of the last tie being severed. I turned back to the stove. I had a sauce to finish. I deglazed the pan with a splash of the margot, scraping up the browned bits of meat. I added the chopped truffles and a splash of heavy cream. I whisked it until it was dark and glossy. It was 6:55. The rumble of the Porsche engine announced their arrival. It was followed by the slam of a car door and the sound of men laughing. The front door opened. Something smells expensive, Gavin's voice boomed through the hall. He walked into the kitchen, loosening his tie. He looked flushed, excited. Beside him was a man I recognized instantly. Fletcher. He was shorter than Gavin Rounder, with a suit that was too shiny and a smile that looked like it was painted on with oil. He carried a leather briefcase that looked like it cost more than he was worth. Well, 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 Gavin said, walking over to the island. Look at this spread. Wagyu, Margot, Fletcher. Look at this. I told you the old man could cook. Fletcher sniffed the air. Very impressive, Mr. Blackwood, he said, his voice oily. I did not know you had it in you. I wiped the knife clean and set it down. I have a lot of surprises left in me, Mr. Fletcher, I said. Gavin laughed, slapping Fletcher on the back. See? He is docile now. He knows who the alpha is. Gavin looked at me, pointing to the bruise on my face. It had darkened to a deep purple, angry and swollen. That looks nasty, Harry, he said with zero sympathy. You should put some makeup on it before we eat. Takes away from the appetite. I touched the bruise. No, I said. I will wear it. It reminds me of why we are here. Gavin shrugged. Suit yourself. Just do not bleed on the tablecloth. He turned to Fletcher. Pour yourself a drink, Fletcher. The old man will serve us in a minute. We will eat. He will sign the papers, and then we can get back to business. Fletcher rubbed his hands together. Excellent. I have the notary seal ready. It will take 2 minutes. They walked past me into the dining room, treating me like part of the furniture, like the help. I looked at the clock. 7:00. Right on cue, the doorbell rang. Gavin stopped mid-stride. He turned back to look at me, his brow furrowed. Who is that? He asked sharply. I did not order anything. I picked up the platter of meat. The smell was intoxicating. I invited a couple of guests, I said calmly. Guests? Gavin's face reddened. I told you this was a private meeting, Harry. I do not want your drinking buddies from the Union Hall eating my food. They are not from the Union Hall, I said, walking past him toward the door. And it is not your food, Gavin. It is mine. I set the platter down on the dining table next to the silver candlesticks Emily had bought for Christmas. Get rid of them, Gavin hissed. Now. I ignored him. I walked to the front door. I unlocked the deadbolt. I opened the door wide. Standing on the porch, bathed in the soft yellow light of the entryway, were 2 people. On the left was a man in a black wool coat. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with silver hair, and a face carved from granite. He carried himself with the quiet, terrifying authority of the federal government. Preston. On the right was a woman. She was elegant, sharp, wearing a tailored suit that commanded respect. Her eyes were intelligent and piercing. She looked like she could buy and sell Gavin 10 times over before breakfast. Margaret Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Construction. Gavin came up behind me, ready to shout at whoever was disturbing his evening. What is the meaning of... His voice died in his throat. He recognized Margaret Sterling instantly. He had been obsessing over her company for months, trying to destroy it. Seeing her standing on his porch was like seeing a ghost. But he did not know Preston. He just saw a big man in a dark suit. Harry said, stepping aside, "Come in. Dinner is served." The air in the foyer seemed to drop 10 degrees the moment Margaret Sterling stepped across the threshold. She brought the chill of the Chicago evening in with her, clinging to her cashmere coat like a second skin. Gavin stood frozen near the dining room archway, his mouth slightly open, looking like a fish pulled suddenly from the water and thrown onto the dock. His eyes darted from Margaret to me and then back to her, searching for some logical explanation that would make sense of this impossibility. In his world, the world of spreadsheets and stock tickers, Margaret Sterling was just a name, a symbol, a target to be taken down. She was not supposed to be a flesh and blood woman standing in his hallway. She was certainly not supposed to be wiping her feet on his welcome mat. Margaret looked at him. Her gaze was not angry. It was surgical. She looked at him the way a demolition expert looks at a condemned building, searching for the structural weaknesses. Then she smiled. It was a terrifyingly polite smile. "Good evening," she said, her voice smooth and cultured. You must be Gavin. Harry has told me so much about you. Gavin made a sound that was half choke, half squeak. He tried to compose himself. He smoothed his tie with a trembling hand. He took a step forward, his instincts as a social climber kicking in even through his panic. Ms. Sterling, he stammered. I did not know. I mean, it is an honor. A true honor. I follow your work closely. Very closely. I watched him struggle. He was terrified. He was wondering if she knew. He was wondering if she had seen the short positions, the forum posts, the lies he was spreading about her life's work. But arrogance is a powerful blinder. I could see the wheels turning in his head. He was convincing himself that this was a coincidence. He was telling himself that the old man just happened to know a rich woman, that I was too stupid to understand the connection. And who is this? Gavin asked, turning his attention to the large man looming behind her. He seemed relieved to look away from Margaret. Preston stepped into the light. He did not smile. He did not offer his hand. He just stood there, a monolith in a dark suit. Preston, he said. His voice was a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate in the floorboards. Just a friend of Harry's. Harry walked past them, playing the role of the gracious host to perfection. Please let me take your coats, I said, reaching out. Margaret slipped out of her coat, revealing a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than Gavin's car. Preston kept his on for a moment longer, staring at Gavin, letting the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable before finally shrugging it off. Emily came clicking down the stairs then. She had changed into a silk dress, something elegant and expensive, ready for her victory dinner. She stopped halfway down when she saw the crowd in the hall. Who are these people? She asked, her voice sharp. Gavin. I thought you said it was just Fletcher. Gavin rushed to the bottom of the stairs, grabbing her arm a little too tightly. Emily, honey, come down, he hissed, his voice pitched high with stress. We have guests, important guests. This is Margaret Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Construction. Emily's eyes went wide. She knew the name. Everyone in Chicago knew the name, but she also knew it was the name Gavin cursed at his computer screen every night. She looked at me, confusion clouding her face. Dad, she asked, how do you know Margaret Sterling? I hung the coats in the closet, taking my time to arrange them neatly on the hangers. I turned back to them, clasping my hands behind my back. Margaret was one of my best students, I said simply. Back when I was teaching advanced structural theory at the Institute. She was the only one who could calculate wind shear loads in her head. Margaret nodded at Emily. Your father taught me everything I know about keeping a building standing when the world tries to knock it down, she said. He is a legend in the industry, Mrs. Cross. I assumed you knew. Emily blinked. She looked at me as if I had suddenly started speaking Greek. To her, I was just the guy who fixed the leaky faucets and paid for the groceries. She had never asked about my career. She had never asked about the buildings I raised. And Preston? I continued, gesturing to the large man who was currently inspecting the crown molding with a critical eye. Preston is my chess partner. We play on Tuesdays. He hates to lose. Preston turned his gaze to Emily. It is true, he said. Harry is always 3 moves ahead. It is infuriating, but it keeps me sharp for my day job. And what do you do, Mr. Preston? Emily asked, trying to regain her social footing. I work for the government, Preston said vaguely. Legal department. Fletcher, who had been hovering by the dining room table guarding his briefcase like a sentinel, finally stepped forward. He smelled money in the room, and like a moth to a flame, he could not resist. A pleasure, he said, extending a sweaty hand. Arthur Fletcher, attorney at law. I handle all of Gavin's business affairs. Preston looked at Fletcher's hand but did not take it. Fletcher, he said, tasting the name. I believe I have seen your name on some paperwork recently. Interesting filings. Fletcher paled slightly, but kept his smile plastered on. Oh, really? Well, I have a very active practice. Shall we eat? I interrupted before the tension could snap the cable. The meat is resting. It is at the perfect temperature. I ushered them into the dining room. It was a formal room with high ceilings and a long mahogany table that seated 10. I had set 5 places. Gavin hung back, pulling Emily close to him. I pretended to adjust the centerpiece, but I was listening. I knew the acoustics of this house perfectly. The archway amplified whispers. What is she doing here? Gavin hissed, his face inches from Emily's ear. Did you know about this? No, Emily whispered back. He never tells me anything. What do we do? She is the one you are betting against, Gavin. If she finds out. She won't find out. Gavin snapped, though his voice trembled. She is just here for dinner. The old man probably doesn't even know what I am doing. He just invited his old friends to show off. Look at him. He is oblivious. He looked over at me. I was pouring water into crystal goblets, humming a little tune, looking for all the world, like a happy, senile grandfather. We just need to get through dinner, Gavin whispered, urgency lacing every word. Let them eat. Keep the conversation light. As soon as the last bite is gone, you claim a headache. We kick them out. Then I make him sign the papers. But what if she stays? Emily asked. She won't, Gavin said. I will make sure of it. Just smile. Pour the wine. And for God's sake, do not mention the stock market. He straightened his jacket, pasted a fake smile on his face, and walked into the dining room. Please sit anywhere, he said, his voice booming with false conviviality. Ms. Sterling, please take the seat to my right. I would love to hear your thoughts on the current zoning laws in the Loop. Margaret looked at the seat. Then she looked at me. I think I will sit next to Harry, she said, walking to the other end of the table. If you don't mind. Gavin's smile twitched. Of course. Of course. Harry, sit down. Stop hovering. I took my seat at the foot of the table. Preston sat on my left, Margaret on my right. Gavin and Emily were at the head with Fletcher sandwiched awkwardly in the middle. It looked like a tribunal. Gavin poured the wine. The 1995 Chateau Margaux glugged into the glasses, a deep, rich ruby color. To old friends, Gavin said, raising his glass, his hand shaking just enough to make the wine ripple. And new opportunities. Preston did not raise his glass. Neither did Margaret. I raised mine. To clarity, I said, and to the structural integrity of the truth. We drank. The wine was magnificent. It tasted of berries and earth and time. It tasted like the calm before the storm. Gavin set his glass down quickly. So Harry tells us you are here to witness the signing, he said, trying to take control of the narrative. It is just a formality, really. A little family business restructuring. Nothing fascinating for people of your stature, I am sure. Actually, Preston said, his voice cutting through the room like a jackhammer, I find family business fascinating. You never know what you are going to find when you start peeling back the layers. Gavin laughed nervously. Well, we are a very boring family, I am afraid. Just hard work and investments. Investments, Margaret said. She picked up her fork, inspecting the tines. I hear you have a very aggressive strategy, Mr. Cross. Gavin choked on his wine. He coughed, his face turning red. Emily patted his back, looking alarmed. I like to take risks, he wheezed. We noticed, Preston said. I stood up. I will get the meat, I said. I walked back into the kitchen. My heart was beating slow and strong. The trap was set. The rats were in the cage. I picked up the heavy silver platter. The Wagyu beef sizzled softly. I arranged the silver cloche over it, hiding the meat from view. But I had another platter prepared. One hidden in the pantry. A second silver platter, identical to the first. I looked at it. Underneath that silver dome was not meat. It was the stack of papers from the safe, the photos of the computer screen, the forensic accounting, the recordings. I took a deep breath. I picked up the first platter, the one with the beef. First we feed them, I whispered to myself. Then we finish them. I walked back into the dining room, the silver platter held high. Dinner is served, I announced. Gavin looked at me with contempt. Just put it down, Harry. Let's get this over with. I placed the platter in the center of the table. Enjoy it, Gavin, I thought. It is the last meal you will ever eat as a free man. I moved around the table with the bottle wrapped in a white linen napkin. The cork had come out with a soft sigh, the sound of a well-kept secret finally being released. I poured a measure into Margaret's glass first. The deep ruby liquid swirled against the crystal, catching the light from the chandelier. She nodded her thanks, her eyes lingering on the label. She knew exactly what this bottle was. She knew that 1995 was a year of struggle and triumph in the vineyards of Bordeaux, just as it had been in my own life. I poured for Preston next. He did not look at the wine. He kept his eyes fixed on Gavin, studying him with the detached intensity of a predator watching a wounded animal limp across a clearing. Then I moved to Fletcher. The lawyer held his glass out eagerly, his greedy fingers leaving smudges on the stem. He was already calculating the price of the wine in his head, wondering how much of my money Gavin had spent to buy it. He did not know that this bottle was paid for, with sweat equity saved from a time when I still had hope for the future. Finally, I poured for Gavin and Emily. Gavin did not even look at me. He was too busy leaning toward Margaret, invading her personal space with his cologne and his desperation. "You know, Ms. Sterling?" Gavin said, his voice loud and booming, trying to fill the room with his importance. "It is a pleasure to finally meet you. I have been analyzing your company's market movements for months. I have to say your conservative approach to the West Coast expansion, it is quaint. Charming, really. But in this market, hesitation is death." I stepped back into the shadows near the sideboard, the empty bottle in my hand. I watched the scene unfold. It was like watching a man walk blindfolded onto a construction site where the safety rails had been removed. Margaret took a slow sip of the wine. She savored it, letting the tannins settle on her tongue. She placed the glass down with a soft click. "Quaint," she repeated, testing the word. "That is an interesting choice of vocabulary, Mr. Cross. In my industry, we prefer the word deliberate. When you are pouring millions of tons of concrete, you measure twice. You pour once. Mistakes are not just lines on a spreadsheet. They are lives." Gavin waved his hand dismissively, a gesture that encompassed the entire room and everything in it. "That is the old way of thinking," he said, chuckling as if she had told a joke. "That is the brick-and-mortar mindset. But we live in the digital age now. Value is not about what you build. It is about what you can convince people you have built. It is about the narrative, the vision." He gestured toward me without looking, pointing a finger over his shoulder. "Take my father-in-law here. Harry is a good man. Salt of the earth. But he spent 40 years of his life mixing concrete and welding steel beams. He thinks hard work is the same thing as smart work. He does not understand that the real masters of the universe do not get their hands dirty. We move capital. We create value out of thin air." I felt a muscle twitch in my jaw. Mixing concrete. That is what he thought I did. He thought structural engineering was just manual labor. He did not know about the sleepless nights calculating wind shear. He did not know about the physics of load distribution. He did not know that without men like me, the glass tower he sat in would be a pile of twisted metal and shattered glass. Emily laughed nervously, taking a large gulp of wine. "Dad did work very hard, Gavin. He provided for us." Gavin patted her hand condescendingly. "Of course he did, babe. And that is adorable. But let us be honest. He was a laborer. He does not understand the complexities of the financial markets. That is why he is so afraid of this loan. He sees debt as a burden. I see it as a tool, a lever to move the world. Margaret smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a structural inspector finding a fatal crack in a support column. A lever, she said softly. Archimedes said, "Give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it, and I shall move the world." But you are forgetting the second part of the equation, Mr. Cross. The fulcrum, the base. If your base is weak, the lever does not move the world. It snaps, and it crushes the person holding it. Gavin frowned, confused by the metaphor. He took a drink of wine, swishing it around his mouth like he had seen people do in movies, having no idea what he was tasting. "I have a very solid base," he insisted. "My firm is on the cutting edge. We are seeing returns that would make your board of directors weep with joy. That is why I wanted to talk to you tonight. About Sterling Construction. I think your stock is undervalued, vulnerable." I tightened my grip on the neck of the bottle. He was doing it. He was sitting at my table, eating my food, and threatening the woman whose company he was trying to destroy. The audacity was breathtaking. Margaret leaned forward, her eyes locked onto his. "Vulnerable," she said. "That is a dangerous word. You know, Mr. Cross, I have always believed that the most important person in any building project isn't the architect. It isn't the financier. It is the structural engineer. The one who ensures that when the wind blows and the earth shakes, the building stands." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "Your office is in the Sterling Plaza Tower, isn't it?" she asked. Gavin nodded, puffing out his chest. 42nd floor, corner office, best view in the city." "It is a magnificent building," Margaret agreed. "It won 3 international awards for safety and innovation." "Do you know why?" Gavin shrugged. "Good architects. Expensive materials." "No," Margaret said. "Because of the seismic joint coupling system used in the foundation. It was a revolutionary design. It allows the building to absorb energy rather than resist it. It was designed by a genius, a man who understood that true strength comes from flexibility, not rigidity." She looked past Gavin, her eyes meeting mine in the shadows. "Do you know who designed that system, Mr. Cross?" she asked. "Do you know the name of the man who keeps your 42nd floor from crashing into the basement every time the wind hits 50 miles an hour?" Gavin laughed again. "I have no idea. Probably some German guy. Or a Japanese firm. Who cares? It is just plumbing and wires in the walls. Just plumbing and wires." I stepped forward. I placed the empty bottle on the sideboard with a deliberate thud. "It was not a German guy, Gavin," I said, my voice low. "And it was not a Japanese firm." Gavin turned to look at me, annoyed at the interruption. "Harry, we are talking business here. Go get the next course. And bring the notary. I want to get this over with." Preston cleared his throat. The sound was deep, resonant, like a stone dropped into a deep well. It commanded immediate attention. Everyone turned to look at the man in the black suit, who had not spoken a word since he entered the house. Preston placed his hands on the table. They were large hands, steady and calm. He looked at Gavin with an expression of mild curiosity, as if he were examining a particularly interesting insect. "You know, Gavin," Preston said, his voice rumbling through the room. "I find your theories on leverage very interesting, especially the part about creating value out of thin air." Gavin looked at him, trying to place him. He was realizing too late that this was not just an old chess partner. "And you are a lawyer?" Gavin asked, his confidence wavering slightly. "Something like that," Preston said. "I work with numbers too. I look for patterns, anomalies. And recently a very interesting pattern crossed my desk." Gavin's smile faltered. "What kind of pattern?" "Short sales," Preston said. Massive leveraged short positions against a single company. Sterling Construction. Executed through a series of shell companies registered in the Caymans. But the interesting thing is the IP address used to execute those trades traces back to a residential address in the suburbs of Chicago. The room went deadly silent. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the shallow breathing of my daughter. Gavin froze. His hand, which had been reaching for his wineglass, stopped in midair. I do not know what you are talking about, he stammered. I am a venture capitalist. I have a diverse portfolio. Preston leaned in closer. I am sure you do, Preston said. But the Securities and Exchange Commission has a different name for it. They call it market manipulation and insider trading based on fabricated information. Gavin turned pale. His eyes darted to Fletcher, seeking help. Fletcher was staring at his plate, sweating, looking like he wanted to dissolve into the floorboards. I heard you have been having some trouble with the SEC lately, Gavin Preston continued relentlessly. I heard they are preparing a subpoena. In fact, I heard the warrant was signed this morning. Gavin's hand shook. His fingers spasmed. The heavy crystal fork he was holding slipped from his grip. It hit the fine china plate with a loud, sharp clatter that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. It bounced off the rim and fell onto the table, spinning noisily before coming to a rest, pointing straight at his heart. Gavin stared at the fork. He could not seem to make his hand work to pick it up. He looked up at Preston, and for the first time I saw real fear in his eyes. "Who are you?" he whispered. I stepped out of the shadows. I walked to the table. I picked up the silver cloche that was covering the center platter. The metal was cool in my hands. "He is the man who is going to introduce you to your new reality, Gavin," I said. I lifted the silver dome. Underneath, sitting on the velvet-lined tray, was not the Wagyu beef. It was a stack of papers, a thick stapled report with the Department of Justice seal on the cover page, and resting on top of it was a USB drive. "Enjoy your meal," I said. "It is going to be a long night." The silver dome sat on the table like a tombstone, but Gavin refused to read the inscription. He stared at the Department of Justice seal for a fraction of a second, his eyes bulging, and then he squeezed them shut. Denial is a powerful drug. It can make a man ignore the fire burning his own shoes just because he does not want to buy a new pair. He swept his arm across the table in a violent, jerky motion, knocking the crystal wineglass over. The dark red liquid bled across the white tablecloth, staining the linen like an expanding wound. He did not apologize. He did not reach for a napkin. Instead, he reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a thick blue folder. "Enough," Gavin roared, slamming the folder down onto the wet tablecloth. The sound made Emily jump. She looked at her husband with wide, terrified eyes. She had never seen him unravel like this in public. In private, yes, she had seen the temper tantrums when the market closed down or when the Wi-Fi lagged, but never in front of strangers, never in front of Margaret Sterling. "Stop the theatrics," Harry Gavin shouted, spitting a little as he spoke. "I do not care about your little props. I do not care about your fake friends. I have a liquidity deadline at 9 a.m. tomorrow, and you are going to fix it." He ripped the folder open and shoved a document toward me. It was the mortgage agreement. The paper was already damp from the spilled wine, but the signature line was dry and waiting. "Sign it," he commanded, his finger stabbing the paper. "Sign the damn house over so I can get Fletcher to wire the funds. Do it now, and maybe I will let you keep living in the basement. Do not make me call the orderlies to drag you to a home tonight." I looked at the paper. It was a standard lien agreement. It would strip the equity out of the property, leaving nothing but debt. If he defaulted, and I knew he would, the bank would take the house within 6 months. He was asking me to sign my own eviction notice. I did not move. I did not reach for the pen he threw at me. I just looked at him with the calm detachment of a man watching a building collapse from a safe distance. Margaret reached out. Her hand was steady, manicured, and draped in gold bracelets. She picked up the soggy document with 2 fingers as if it were a soiled rag. "May I?" she asked, not waiting for an answer. She brought the paper closer to the candlelight, adjusting her reading glasses. She scanned the terms. She looked at the interest rate. She looked at the property description. Then she laughed. It was not a polite laugh. It was a genuine, amused chuckle. The sound of a professional seeing an amateur make a fatal error in calculation. Gavin glared at her. "What is so funny?" "Oh, Mr. Cross," Margaret said, placing the paper back down. "It is just that this document is worthless. It is a fairy tale." Gavin turned purple. "It is a standard lien drafted by my attorney. It is perfectly legal." "It might be drafted correctly," Margaret said, wiping her fingers on a napkin. "But the premise is flawed. You cannot mortgage this house, Gavin. You cannot leverage it. You cannot sell it." "And why is that?" Gavin sneered. "Because the old man is stubborn." "No," Margaret said, her eyes dancing with mirth. "Because you do not own it." The room went silent again. Emily set her glass down hard. "Excuse me," Emily said, her voice trembling with indignation. "Of course we own it. We have lived here for 5 years. We picked out the curtains. We renovated the master bath. My name is on the mailbox." Margaret looked at Emily with pity. "Putting your name on a mailbox does not convey title, dear," she said softly. "I had my team run a title search on this property this morning when Harry invited me. I like to know where I am eating. And according to the Cook County Recorder of Deeds, neither Gavin Cross nor Emily Cross appears anywhere on the title history." Gavin stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the floor. "That is a lie. Harry bought this house for us. It was a wedding gift. He put it in our names. He told us." He turned to me, his eyes wild. "Tell her, Harry. Tell her it is my house." I took a sip of my water. It was cool and clean. "I never said it was your house, Gavin," I said quietly. "I said it was your home. There is a difference." "What are you talking about?" Emily cried, standing up to join her husband. "You signed the papers at the closing." "Dad, you gave us the keys." "I signed the papers as the trustee," I corrected her. "Trustee." Gavin repeated the word, hanging in the air like smoke. "Yes," I said. 10 years ago, when I started seeing how you spent money, Gavin, when I saw how you leased cars you could not afford and bought suits on credit, I made a decision. I knew that if I gave this house to Emily, you would leverage it within a year. You would gamble it away." I looked at Fletcher. The lawyer was trying to make himself invisible, sinking lower in his chair. "So I created the Blackwood Trust," I continued. "A revocable living trust. I am the sole grantor and the sole trustee. The house belongs to the trust. Not to me. Not to you." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. "You have been living here as guests," I said. "Guests who do not pay rent. Guests who treat the landlord like a servant. But you own nothing. The equity you are trying to sell to save your skin does not exist for you. It is a ghost." Gavin looked at Fletcher. "Is this true?" Fletcher loosened his collar. He looked like he was having trouble breathing. I did not check the title deed recently," Gavin Fletcher stammered. "I assumed, since you lived here." "You assumed?" Gavin screamed. "I pay you $500 an hour to assume." He turned back to me. His face was twisted into a mask of pure hatred. He looked like a cornered rat realizing the trap had no exit. "You old bastard," he hissed. "You tricked us. You let us put money into this place. We paid for the pool. We paid for the landscaping." "You paid for nothing," I reminded him. "I paid for the pool maintenance. I paid the gardeners. You just threw parties here and pretended you were rich." Gavin slammed his fists onto the table, making the plates jump. "I do not care about your trust," he shouted. "You can revoke it. You can sign it over. Do it now, Harry. I need that money. I am short on sterling stock, and the margin call is coming at opening bell. If I do not post collateral, they will liquidate me. I will lose everything." He pointed a shaking finger at my face. "You owe me this," he screamed, "for taking care of you, for letting you live here after Mom died. Sign the paper." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had slapped me in the kitchen. I looked at the man who had forged my signature. I looked at the man who wanted to destroy my reputation. He wanted me to save him. He wanted me to pull him out of the rubble of the disaster he had created. I stood up slowly. I picked up the wine-stained mortgage paper. I looked Gavin in the eye. "You want to mortgage my house to pay for your gambling debts?" I asked, my voice steady as a steel beam. "You want me to destroy my security to save your vanity?" "Yes," Gavin breathed, thinking he had won, thinking I was about to cave. "Just sign it." I ripped the paper in half. The sound was loud in the quiet room. Then I ripped it again, and again, until it was just a pile of wet confetti on the table. "Never," I said. Gavin stared at the torn paper. His face went slack. "What did you say?" he whispered. I said never, I repeated, my voice rising. "Not 1 cent, not 1 brick. You dug this hole, Gavin. You can climb out of it, or you can let the dirt bury you, but you are not pulling me down with you." Emily let out a sob. "Dad, please. He will go to jail." I looked at my daughter. She was crying now, but they were tears of fear for herself, not for me. He should have thought of that before he forged my signature. "Emily," I said, "he should have thought of that before he raised his hand to me in my own kitchen." Gavin lunged. He came across the table, reaching for my throat, his eyes blind with panic and rage. "You ruined me," he screamed. "I will kill you." He never made it. Preston moved with a speed that belied his size. He was out of his chair and blocking Gavin's path before Gavin could even clear the centerpiece. "Sit down, son!" Preston rumbled, his hand clamping onto Gavin's shoulder like a vice. "Unless you want to add assault on a federal officer to your list of problems tonight." Gavin froze. He looked at Preston's hand, then at his face. The reality of who was in the room finally crashed down on him. "Federal officer," Gavin whispered. Preston smiled. It was a cold, wolfish smile. "Oh, we haven't even gotten to the dessert yet, Gavin," he said. "Sit down. Harry has 1 more course to serve." Gavin sat heavily in his chair, pushed down by the weight of Preston's hand and the sudden gravity of his situation. He looked like a man who had just survived a car crash only to realize he was still trapped inside the burning wreckage. He rubbed his shoulder where Preston had grabbed him, his eyes darting around the room, searching for an exit that did not exist. I walked to the sideboard. My movements were slow and deliberate. I was not in a hurry anymore. The structural integrity of the evening had held. The load-bearing walls were coming down exactly as I had calculated. I picked up the second silver platter. It was identical to the first one, the one that had hidden the Department of Justice report. This one was lighter, but the contents were far more volatile. I carried it to the table. The silver cloche gleamed under the chandelier, reflecting the distorted faces of the people sitting around the mahogany surface. Emily was weeping softly, her face buried in her hands. Fletcher was wiping sweat from his forehead with a napkin that was already soaked. Margaret was watching me, her eyes sharp and expectant. I placed the platter directly in front of Gavin. It sat on the white tablecloth like a final offering. "I have 1 last course for you, Gavin," I said. Gavin stared at the silver dome. He did not want to touch it. He looked at it as if it were a bomb. In a way it was. "What is this?" He rasped, his voice dry and brittle. "It is dessert," I said. "A special delicacy. I prepared it myself." just for you." "Open it," Preston commanded. His voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of a gavel striking a bench. Gavin reached out. His hand trembled so violently that his fingernails clicked against the silver handle. He gripped it. He took a breath that sounded like a rattle in his chest. He lifted the lid. There was no food underneath. There was no chocolate souffle or fruit tart. Resting on the velvet lining was a neat stack of color-printed documents and a small black USB drive. Gavin stared at them. He blinked, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. He picked up the top sheet of paper. It was a screen capture. High resolution. It showed a chat log from an encrypted messaging app. The timestamp was from 3 weeks ago. The participants were marked as G. Cross and A. Fletcher. I watched his eyes scan the text. I knew exactly what it said. I had memorized it. Subject: the old man. G. Cross. He is asking questions again. He is becoming a liability. A. Fletcher. We can file for a conservatorship. Claim dementia. If you get 2 doctors to sign off, we can take control of his assets within 48 hours. G. Cross. Do it. I am tired of asking for permission. Let us put him in that state facility off the highway. The cheap one. He won't know the difference once they medicate him. He will just be a drooling vegetable. Gavin dropped the paper. It fluttered to the table, landing face up. Emily looked at it. She read the words. Her sobbing stopped abruptly. She looked at her husband. "You were going to put him in a home," she whispered. "A state facility. You told me you were looking at luxury assisted living communities. You told me he would have a garden view." Gavin did not answer her. He was frantically shuffling through the other papers. The next document was a transaction history from his trading account. It showed the massive naked short positions he had taken against Sterling Construction. It showed the leverage ratios. It showed that he had bet every single dollar he had and millions he did not have on the destruction of Margaret's company. Margaret reached over and plucked the paper from his hands. She read it quickly, her eyes narrowing. "You leveraged yourself 20-1, she said, her voice icy. "You were not just betting against my company, Mr. Cross. You were trying to induce a panic. You were leaking false safety reports to analysts. That is not investing. That is sabotage." Gavin ignored her. He was staring at the last document in the stack. It was the forensic analysis of my 401k withdrawal. The one with the forged signature. The one that proved he had stolen my life savings to fund his margin calls. He looked at the USB drive. "What is on this?" he asked, his voice barely audible. I leaned in close. "That is the audio," I said. Gavin looked up at me. "Audio?" "Yes," I said. "From your office, when from the kitchen, from the night you told Fletcher to draft the competency papers. I have recordings, Gavin, hours of them. I have you laughing about how easy it was to steal from the clueless old man. I have you planning to sell my patent to a Chinese firm for pennies, just to get quick cash." I pointed to the USB drive. "I heard you, Gavin. Every word. I heard you call me a fossil. I heard you say I was useless. I heard you say that the only value I had left was the equity in this house." Gavin's face turned a deep, blotchy red. The veins in his neck bulged. The fear was evaporating, replaced by a cornered, vicious anger. He stood up so fast his chair tipped over backward and crashed onto the floor. "You tapped my office," he screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You recorded me in my own home." "My home," I corrected him. "This is illegal," Gavin shouted, saliva flying from his lips. "This is entrapment. You cannot use this. This is a violation of my privacy rights." "Fletcher." He turned to the lawyer, grabbing him by the lapels of his cheap suit. "Fletcher, do something. This is inadmissible. He cannot record me without my consent. This is a felony. Sue him. Sue this old bastard for everything he has left." Fletcher did not move. He sat there frozen, his eyes fixed on Preston. He knew who Preston was now. He knew that arguing privacy laws in front of a federal prosecutor while sitting at a table covered in evidence of fraud was a suicide mission. Gavin shook him. "Did you hear me, Fletcher? He violated my rights. He invaded my privacy." I looked at Gavin. He was manic. He was hysterical. He truly believed that he was the victim here. He believed that his right to plot my destruction in private superseded my right to survive. "You gave up your right to privacy when you decided to commit crimes in my house, Gavin," I said, my voice steady. "You gave up your rights when you forged my name." "I did not forge anything," Gavin lied, desperate and wild. "You signed those papers. You are senile. You forgot. That is what we will tell the judge. You are confused, Harry. You need help." He looked around the room, seeking an ally, finding none. "Emily, tell them. Tell them your father gets confused. Tell them he signed the withdrawal." Emily shrank away from him. She looked at the chat log on the table. The words "drooling vegetable" seemed to be burned into her retinas. "You were going to have him medicated," she whispered. "You were going to lock him away." "It was for his own good," Gavin screamed. "He is incompetent. Look at him. He is paranoid. He thinks he is a spy." Preston stood up. He did not rush. He moved with the slow, inevitable weight of a glacier. "That is enough, Mr. Cross," Preston said. Gavin spun around to face him. "You stay out of this. You have no jurisdiction here. This is a civil matter. It is a family dispute." Preston reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a leather wallet and flipped it open. The gold badge of the Department of Justice glinted in the candlelight. "It ceased to be a civil matter when you wired stolen funds across state lines," Preston said. "It ceased to be a family dispute when you engaged in securities fraud involving a publicly traded company, and it certainly ceased to be private when you conspired to defraud a senior citizen of his pension." Preston pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The metal clicked ominously. "Gavin Cross, you are under arrest," Preston said, his voice filling the room. Gavin stared at the handcuffs. He looked at Fletcher. "Do something," he begged. Fletcher slowly raised his hands in the air, surrendering before the fight even began. I cannot help you," Gavin, Fletcher stammered. "If the feds are here, if they have this kind of evidence, I need to think about my own license." "You coward," Gavin spat. He looked at the window. For a second, I thought he might run. I thought he might try to dive through the glass and sprint across the lawn I had mowed, but he didn't. He looked at me. His eyes were filled with a toxic mixture of hatred and disbelief. "You did this," he hissed. "You ruined me. You ruined everything. We had a good life. We were happy." "You were happy, Gavin," I said. "I was just the fuel you were burning to keep yourself warm." Preston stepped forward and spun Gavin around. He slammed him face down onto the table right next to the plate of cold Wagyu beef. Gavin grunted as the air left his lungs. "You have the right to remain silent," Preston recited, tightening the cuffs behind Gavin's back. I watched. I watched the man who had slapped me get chained like an animal. I watched the man who had called me clueless get outsmarted by the very person he underestimated. I picked up the USB drive from the silver platter. "You should have tried the beef, Gavin," I said quietly. It really was quite tender. The room was vibrating with the energy of a collapsing star. Fletcher was the first to break. He was a survivor of the legal sewers. He knew that paper trail was a death sentence. He lunged across the table, his expensive tie dipping into the pool of spilled wine. His hands clawed at the stack of papers, trying to snatch the forensic accounting report and the chat logs. He looked like a desperate man trying to put a fire out with his bare hands. "Put it down." Fletcher Preston's voice was like a thunderclap. Fletcher froze, his hand hovering over the documents. He looked up at Preston. You have no authority here, Fletcher hissed, saliva spraying. This is a private residence. These documents are privileged. Preston reached into his jacket pocket again. He did not pull out a weapon. He pulled out a small leather wallet. He flipped it open and set it on the table next to the silver platter. The gold badge gleamed under the crystal chandelier. It was not just a badge. It was the seal of the United States Department of Justice. Sit down, Fletcher Preston said, his voice dropping an octave. I am the United States Attorney for the Northern District of Illinois, and right now you are about 5 seconds away from adding obstruction of justice and destruction of evidence to your indictment. Fletcher collapsed back into his chair. All the color drained from his face, leaving him looking like wet dough. He looked at the badge, then at Gavin, then at the door. He realized there was no way out. Gavin was staring at the badge. His mouth was opening and closing like a fish on dry land. You are the prosecutor, he whispered. Preston nodded. And the FBI team stationed in the van outside has been recording every word spoken at this table for the last hour, Preston said. We have the warrant, Gavin. We have the wiretap authorization. And thanks to your little performance tonight, we have a confession. Gavin turned to me. His eyes were wide with betrayal. You set me up, he screamed. You wore a wire. I did not need to wear a wire, Gavin, I said calmly. The house is wired. Preston looked at Gavin with a mixture of pity and disgust. You thought Harry was just a senile old man, Preston said. You thought he was sitting in the basement staring at the wall. You did not know he called me 3 months ago. 3 months. Gavin repeated the timeline, not making sense to him. Yes, Preston continued. Harry noticed the irregularities in the sterling stock patterns back in January. He saw the withdrawal attempts on his accounts. Most men would have confronted you immediately. Most men would have shouted. But Harry is an engineer. He knows you do not start demolition until the perimeter is secure. Preston walked around the table. He moved with the heavy inevitability of a bulldozer. He brought us the initial evidence, Preston said. He worked with our forensic accountants. He let you continue your little game, Gavin. He let you dig the hole deeper and deeper, just so we could get the full scope of your operation. We needed to know who else was involved. We needed Fletcher. And tonight, you handed him to us on a silver platter. Literally, I thought, looking at the tray. Gavin looked like he was going to be sick. He realized that for 3 months, while he was mocking me, while he was treating me like a burden, I had been the one holding the leash. I had been the one meeting with federal agents. I had been the one building the case that would end his life as he knew it. This is entrapment, Gavin shouted, his voice cracking. You cannot do this. I have rights. You have the right to remain silent, Preston said, reaching for his radio. And I strongly suggest you use it. Preston spoke into the radio on his shoulder. Move in. Secure the premises. The front door burst open. The sound was deafening. It was not the polite knock of a guest. It was the battering ram of the law. Federal agents. Nobody move. A dozen agents in tactical gear poured into the hallway. Their boots thundered on the marble floor, the same floor Emily worried about scratching with high heels. They filled the dining room, their weapons drawn, but lowered their faces serious and professional. Emily screamed. She pushed her chair back and scrambled into the corner, cowering behind the china cabinet. She looked at the agents, then at her husband, then at me. "Daddy, make them stop," she wailed. "Please tell them it is a mistake." I looked at her. I did not move. I could not stop this. An avalanche does not stop because you ask it nicely. 2 agents moved toward Fletcher. He did not resist. He put his hands behind his head, interlacing his fingers, looking at the floor. He knew the drill. He knew the game was over. 2 other agents moved toward Gavin. Gavin panicked. He tried to stand up. He tried to run. He knocked his chair over and scrambled toward the French doors leading to the patio. "Get him," an agent shouted. They were on him in a second. They grabbed him by the arms. Gavin struggled, kicking and screaming like a spoiled child who had been told no for the first time in his life. "Get off me," he shrieked. "Do you know who I am? I am a partner at Cross Ventures. I have rights." They spun him around. They slammed him face down onto the mahogany table. His face hit the wood with a sickening thud right next to the plate of cold Wagyu beef. The sauce splashed onto his expensive Italian suit. The truffle aroma mixed with the smell of sweat and fear. "Hold still," the agent commanded, pulling Gavin's arms behind his back. The handcuffs clicked. It was a sharp, mechanical sound. The sound of finality. Gavin grunted as the metal bit into his wrists. He turned his head, his cheek pressed against the tablecloth, his eyes locking onto mine. "Harry," he begged, his voice breaking. "Harry, please. Tell them. Tell them I can pay it back. I just need time. The market will turn. I can fix this." I stood up and walked over to him. I looked down at the man who had slapped me. I looked down at the man who had called me a parasite. "There is no fixing this, Gavin," I said softly. "The foundation has cracked. The building is coming down." Preston walked over and stood beside me. "Take him out," Preston ordered the agents, "and secure his electronics. I want every laptop, every phone, and every hard drive in this house bagged and tagged." The agents hauled Gavin to his feet. He was weeping now, great heaving sobs that shook his body. He looked small. He looked weak. He looked like exactly what he was, a fraud who had run out of road. They dragged him toward the door. He dragged his feet, his shoes scuffing the floor. Emily ran toward him, but an agent held her back. "Gavin," she screamed. "Gavin, what do I do?" Gavin did not answer her. He was too busy feeling sorry for himself. Fletcher was led out behind him, his head hung low, his career ending in a walk of shame past the dinner guests. The room suddenly felt very empty. The shouting had stopped. The only sound was the heavy breathing of the agents securing the perimeter and the soft sobbing of my daughter in the corner. Margaret stood up. She smoothed her skirt. She looked at the chaotic scene at the ruined dinner at the broken family. She walked over to me. "I am sorry it had to end like this, Harry," she said quietly. "But you did the right thing. He would have destroyed everything you built." "I know," I said, feeling a wave of exhaustion wash over me. "I know." Preston put a hand on my shoulder. "We will need a statement, Harry," he said. "But it can wait until morning. Get some rest. We will post a guard outside the door tonight, just in case." I nodded. "Thank you, Preston." The agents began to file out, taking their prisoners with them. The red and blue lights of the police cruisers flashed through the front window, painting the walls in alternating shades of violence and bruising. I looked at the table. The wine was spilled. The meat was cold. The evidence was gathered. The dinner party was over. But the cleanup was just beginning. Gavin did not go quietly. As the agents hauled him toward the front door, his boots scuffing against the marble he had been so proud of, he let out a stream of obscenities that would have made a construction foreman blush. He cursed the government. He cursed the market. But mostly he cursed me. His voice cracked and broke as he screamed that I was a thief, that I had stolen his life, that I was a jealous old man who could not stand to see his son-in-law succeed. It was the desperate thrashing of a drowning man who refuses to believe the water is deep. I watched him go. I watched the back of his expensive Italian suit jacket disappear into the night, followed closely by Fletcher. The lawyer was already babbling to the agent, holding his arms, spilling secrets, before he even reached the squad car. I heard him through the open door, his voice high and thin with panic, saying he would cooperate, saying he had emails, saying Gavin had forced him to draft the fraudulent loan documents. Loyalty in their world was a currency, and Fletcher had just spent his last dime to buy a lighter sentence. Then the door slammed shut, and the house fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. The flashing red and blue lights from the driveway cut through the front windows, strobing across the dining room walls, illuminating the wreckage of the dinner party in harsh rhythmic pulses. I turned back to the table. Emily was still huddled in the corner by the china cabinet. She looked small. She looked like a child who had broken a vase and was waiting for the punishment. But she was not a child. She was a 32-year-old woman who had watched her husband strike her father and checked her watch. When she realized Gavin was truly gone, she moved. She scrambled across the floor on her hands and knees, ignoring the spilled wine that soaked into the hem of her silk dress. She reached for me, clutching at the fabric of my trousers. "Daddy," she wailed, her voice raw and terrified. "Daddy, please. You have to stop them. You have to fix this." I looked down at her. I looked at her manicured hands gripping my leg. Hands that had never known a day of hard labor. Hands that I had protected from the world for 3 decades. "I do not know anything," she sobbed, tears streaming down her face and ruining her makeup. "I swear to you, Dad. I am a victim here too. Gavin lied to me. He told me everything was legal. He told me you wanted to help us. I did not know about the fraud. I did not know about the stocks." She looked up at me, her eyes pleading, searching my face for the soft indulgence she had found there her entire life. She was looking for the father who always fixed the flat tire, who always paid the credit card bill, who always forgave. But that father was gone. He had been slapped out of existence at 8 o'clock that morning. I stepped back, pulling my leg away from her grasp. She fell forward, catching herself on her hands against the cold floor. "Get up, Emily," I said. My voice was not angry. It was tired. It was the voice of a man who has just finished demolishing a house he built with his own hands. She sat back on her heels, looking up at me with confusion. "Dad, please," she whispered. "I am your daughter. You cannot let them take Gavin. We will lose everything. The cars, the club memberships, our reputation." I looked at her, and for a moment I did not see the woman on the floor. I saw the scene from this morning playing out in my mind like a loop of security footage. I saw Gavin's hand connect with my face. I saw my glasses skid across the floor. And I saw her. I saw her standing in the doorway, holding her coffee mug, her face impassive, her eyes cold. "You are not a victim, Emily," I said. "You are an accomplice." "No," she protested, shaking her head violently. "I did not sign anything." "You watched him hit me," I said, cutting through her excuses. "You watched him strike your 72-year-old father in the kitchen of the house I bought for you. And you did not scream. You did not call the police. You did not even help me up. You told me I was annoying him." Emily flinched as if I had slapped her. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The truth hung in the air between us, heavy and undeniable. "You chose your side this morning," I continued. "When you chose convenience over conscience, you made your decision. You wanted the lifestyle Gavin provided more than you wanted a father. Well, now you have neither." I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket. I pulled out a folded document. It was not a loan application. It was a single sheet of paper stamped with the seal of the Blackwood Trust. I dropped it on the floor in front of her. It landed next to her knee. "What is this?" she whispered, staring at the paper through her tears. "It is a notice to vacate," I said. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with shock. "Vacate," she repeated, the word foreign to her tongue. "Yes," I said. "This house belongs to the trust. The trust is revoking your right of occupancy effective immediately. You have 24 hours to remove your personal effects. Anything left after that time will be placed on the curb for trash collection." She stared at me, unable to comprehend that the safety net she had jumped on for years had finally snapped. "You are kicking me out," she gasped. "Your own daughter." "Dad, I have nowhere to go. Our accounts are frozen. Gavin said they froze everything. I have no money." I looked at the Wagyu beef on the table, cold and uneaten. "You have a job," I said. You are the director of human resources for a logistics firm. You make 6 figures, Emily. You can afford a hotel. You can afford an apartment. You just cannot afford this. Emily looked desperate. She turned to Margaret Sterling, who had been watching the scene with a look of stoic judgment. Emily tried to find an ally, a fellow woman, someone who might understand. Ms. Sterling, please, she begged. You understand, do not you? You know how men like Gavin are. He manipulated me. Please talk to him. Tell him he is being unreasonable. Margaret stepped forward. Her heels clicked sharply on the floor. She looked down at Emily, not with sympathy, but with the cold appraisal of a CEO who has just discovered a liability in her organization. I do understand, Mrs. Cross, Margaret said, her voice cool and crisp. I understand perfectly. I understand that character is not defined by who you are married to, but by what you tolerate. Margaret reached into her purse. She did not pull out a tissue. She pulled out her phone. And regarding your employment, she continued, you work for Sterling Logistics, do you not? A subsidiary of Sterling Construction. Emily nodded, hope flickering in her eyes. Yes. Yes, I do. I have been there for 3 years. Margaret tapped the screen of her phone, sending a quick message. We have a zero-tolerance policy at Sterling, Margaret said. Not just for fraud, but for the aiding and abetting of financial crimes. Your husband was betting against the parent company of your employer. He was using inside information that he likely gleaned from your proximity to the industry. Emily shook her head frantically. No, I never told him anything. It does not matter, Margaret said, putting her phone away. The perception of conflict is enough. But beyond that, we do not employ individuals who lack moral fiber. I just sent a message to the head of HR at Logistics. Your access badge has been deactivated. Your severance package has been denied for cause. You are fired effective immediately. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a vacuum sealing. Emily knelt there on the rug, surrounded by the ruins of her life. In the span of 10 minutes, she had lost her husband, her home, her inheritance, and her career. She had been stripped bare. She looked at the walls of the dining room. She looked at the crystal chandelier she had picked out in Paris. She looked at the life she had curated so carefully for social media. It was all smoke. It was all gone. She let out a sound that was not quite a scream and not quite a sob. It was a low, keening wail of total loss. She curled into herself, her forehead touching the floor, her expensive dress pooling around her like a shroud. I watched her for a moment longer. I felt a phantom ache in my chest, a memory of the love I used to have for her. But I squashed it. I cemented over it. That love was the weakness that had allowed this to happen. I had loved her too much and disciplined her too little. I had built a house for her, but I had failed to build her character. I turned away from her. I could not look at her anymore. Preston walked over to the door and opened it for the police officer who was waiting outside to ensure the premises were vacated safely. I walked to the head of the table where Gavin had been sitting. I picked up the bottle of Chateau Margaux. It was still half full. I looked at Margaret and Preston. Let us go into the living room, I said. The air is better in there. I walked out of the dining room, leaving my daughter weeping on the floor of a house she no longer lived in, grieving a husband who never loved her, mourning a father she had betrayed. I did not look back. The demolition was complete. Now it was time to clear the debris. The flashing lights of the squad cars finally faded from the front windows, leaving the house in a sudden, heavy darkness. The aggressive wail of the sirens grew distant, replaced by the ambient hum of the Chicago suburbs, a world that had no idea what had just happened behind these brick walls. The dining room felt like a battlefield after the smoke had cleared. The air still smelled of spilled wine and expensive beef, but the toxicity, the suffocating pressure of Gavin's greed was gone, sucked out the door along with him. I heard the frantic thudding of footsteps on the floor above us. Emily was running back and forth across the master bedroom, dragging suitcases from the closet. I could hear the hangers rattling, the drawers being ripped open. It was the sound of a rat scurrying from a sinking ship, desperate to salvage whatever scraps it could carry before the water rushed in. I did not feel pity. I felt a cold detachment. She was packing the clothes I had paid for into the luggage I had bought her to go to a life I would no longer subsidize. I turned to my guests. Preston and Margaret were standing amidst the wreckage of the dinner party, looking at me with quiet respect. They did not look like powerful titans of industry and law right now. They looked like friends. "Let us sit," I said, gesturing toward the living room. "The chairs in there are comfortable and the air is cleaner." We walked into the living room. It was a space Gavin had filled with uncomfortable modern furniture, designed to impress rather than to comfort. But the fireplace was mine. I walked over and struck a match, lighting the kindling I had laid earlier. The fire caught crackling and popping, casting a warm orange glow over the room, chasing away the sterile chill of the central air. I placed the bottle of 1995 Chateau Margaux on the coffee table. There was enough left for 3 glasses. I poured. My hand was steady. The tremor that had plagued me for months, the result of stress and repressed anger, was gone. Margaret took her glass and settled into one of the armchairs. She looked tired but satisfied. The tension around her eyes had smoothed out. She had just watched a threat to her company be neutralized in real time. Preston loosened his tie, unbuttoning the top button of his shirt. He took a long sip of the wine and sighed. "That is good wine, Harry," he rumbled. "It tastes like victory. It tastes like survival," I corrected him, taking my own seat. Above us, something heavy hit the floor with a thud. Emily dropping a suitcase. We all looked up at the ceiling, then back at each other. "She will be gone by morning," Preston said. "I have an officer stationed at the end of the block to make sure she does not try to take anything that belongs to the trust. The fixtures stay. The art stays. She leaves with her clothes and her consequences." I nodded, watching the flames dance in the hearth. "Thank you, Preston," I said, "for everything. I could not have pulled the trigger without you." "You built the case," Harry, Preston said, raising his glass. "I just brought the handcuffs. You did the hard work. You lived in the trenches with the enemy." Margaret set her glass down on a coaster. She reached into the inside pocket of her blazer. She pulled out a long rectangular envelope. It was cream-colored, thick and heavy. She leaned forward and placed it on the table in front of me. "We have some unfinished business, Harry," she said softly. I looked at the envelope. "What is this?" I asked. Margaret smiled. "You remember when you consulted on the Sterling Tower back in '98, she asked. "You developed that seismic coupling. You refused to take a fee. You said you wanted equity instead. You said you believed in the company." I nodded. I remembered. Gavin had told me I was stupid for not taking the cash. He said equity in a construction firm was dead money. "I never touched it," I said. "I just let it sit." "Exactly," Margaret said. "You were a silent partner, Harry, a ghost in the machine. But you owned 15% of the founding shares. You never cashed a dividend check. You just instructed us to reinvest it. Compound interest is a powerful thing, Harry, especially over 25 years of aggressive growth." She tapped the envelope. "This is not a payout for the patent," she said. "That is separate. This is just the dividend distribution for this fiscal year. It has been sitting in escrow waiting for you to claim it." I picked up the envelope. I slid my finger under the flap and tore it open. Inside was a single check. It was printed on watermarked paper, blue and gray. I looked at the numbers. $4,500,000. I blinked. I read it again. It was not a mistake. The zeros stretched out across the line. $4.5 million. This was just for this year, and I still owned the stock. I looked up at Margaret. My throat felt tight. "I could have paid off the house 10 times over," I whispered. I could have bought Gavin's silence. I could have bought peace. Margaret shook her head. You cannot buy peace from a man like Gavin, she said. If you had given him this, he would have burned through it in a month and come back for more. He was a black hole, Harry. You did not need money. You needed a boundary. And tonight you built a wall he cannot climb. I looked at the check again. It was just paper. But it represented freedom. It represented power. I stood up and walked over to the fireplace. On the mantel, sitting in a simple silver frame, was a photo of Martha. She was smiling, her hair windblown, standing on the shore of Lake Geneva, before we bought the house, before everything got complicated. She had died in pain because I was trying to save money. She had died worrying about the heating bill. I touched the cool glass of the frame. I am sorry, Martha, I whispered. I should have done this sooner. I turned back to Preston and Margaret. I held up the check. I do not need this, I said. I have my pension. I have the house. I have enough to buy steaks and good wine when I want them. I do not need $4 million. Preston leaned forward. Then what are you going to do with it, Harry? I looked at the fire. I thought about the slap. I thought about the feeling of helplessness, of being old and disregarded in my own home. I thought about how many other people were out there right now, sitting in kitchens, being bullied by their children, being forced to sign papers they did not understand, being treated like burdens instead of human beings. I am going to build something, I said. A building? Margaret asked, her interest piqued. No, I said. A fortress. I looked at them, my voice gaining strength. I am going to start a foundation. The Martha Blackwood Center. I want to build a facility, not a nursing home, a sanctuary, a place for elderly people who are victims of financial and physical abuse by their families. I gripped the check tightly. I want lawyers there to help them protect their assets. I want doctors who listen to them. I want good food. I want safety. I want a place where no one ever has to be afraid of their own children again. Margaret stood up. Her eyes were shining. We can build that, she said. Sterling Construction will donate the materials. We will do it at cost. Preston stood up too. And I will handle the legal framework, he said. We will make sure it is untouchable. Above us, the front door slammed shut. The sound echoed through the house, final and absolute. Then came the sound of a car engine starting, not the Porsche, just Emily's sedan, and driving away into the night. She was gone. The house was empty of parasites. I sat back down. The silence in the room was not heavy anymore. It was peaceful. It was the silence of a structure that had weathered the storm and was still standing. I picked up my glass of wine. The liquid was dark, almost black in the firelight. I swirled it, watching the legs run down the side of the glass. 1995. A good year. A year of endurance. I raised the glass to my friends. To Martha, I said. And to new foundations. To Martha, they repeated, raising their glasses. I took a sip. The wine was dry, complex, full of tannins and history. It hit the back of my throat with a sharp bite, the astringency of old grapes and oak barrels. But as it settled, as the warmth spread through my chest, the flavor changed. It softened. It became rich and velvety, leaving a taste of dark fruit and victory on my tongue. It was bitter, I thought, closing my eyes. The road to get here was bitter. The betrayal was bitter. The slap was bitter. But this moment, this freedom. I opened my eyes and looked at the fire. The taste of justice is astringent, I said, setting the glass down. But the aftertaste is sweet. Screen fades to black. I learned that love without boundaries is not love. It is just fuel for someone else's greed. For years I built a life for my daughter, but I failed to build her character. Gavin mistook my silence for weakness and my patience for senility. But like any good structure, When the load becomes too heavy, you do not simply patch the cracks. You must either reinforce the foundation or condemn the building. True wealth is not the money in the bank. It is the ability to look in the mirror with dignity. Never set yourself on fire just to keep ungrateful people warm. If watching justice be served tasted as sweet to you as that vintage wine, please hit the like button. It helps this channel grow. Subscribe so you never miss a story of redemption. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to teach a hard lesson to someone you loved? I want to hear your story.